very warm welcome to everyone. This is a guest lecture in HS 518, a course on cognitive philosophy and psychoanalysis. And I can see there are external audience members today, apart from the students registered in the course. Very warm afternoon, a very good afternoon to everyone. And I'm very happy to have Dr. Anup Dhar here today, who will be talking about something that speaks to the very core or the heart of this course, that wants to build bridges essentially between philosophy of cognition and psychoanalysis, especially in the Lacanian orientation. And what Dr. Dhar will be talking about today touches on some of the things we have been discussing, for example, the 1915 Freud text on the unconscious, and the discussion about the way feelings or affect is displaced and not repressed as such, whereas the representational content, the ideational content, or what Lacan would call the signifier, is the material that gets repressed. We also have a certain section coming up in this course where we will be talking a little bit, at least, about cognitively mapping the unconscious. And in today's talk, Professor Dhar will kind of touch on that question as well, apart from the question of affect signifier and the relation there. I wouldn't prolong this discussion right now. Just to formally introduce Dr. Dhar, or Anupda as I call him. Dr. Anup Dhar is Senior Fellow in Practical Philosophy at Livonics Institute of Integrated Learning and Research. He was formerly a professor of psychology and professor of philosophy at Ambedkar University, Delhi. He is also the director of the Center for Development Practice. He is a medical professional and someone who has also been a left political activist. He has had his encounters with both psychoanalysis and Marxist politics in his own subjective trajectory, which is extremely rich, goes without saying. As a scholar, he has produced 9 books and monographs, and has published more than 70 papers in esteemed journals such as Cambridge Journal of Economics, Rethinking Marxism, Economic and Political Weekly, and so on and so forth. He's currently writing a book on Indian psychoanalysis. He's also editing the works of the English works of Girindra Shekhar Bose, and writing a book on politics and spectrality, possibly in Bangla. So there's a lot of great work to look forward to. And today, Dr. Dhar will be talking about corticocentrism and the unconscious. So over to you, Anup Dhar.
Camellia, right. The PPT is with her. Yeah. I hope the PPT is visible, the PowerPoint is visible. Yeah. Orko, tell me when it's 4:40-ish around. Okay, so first, I must thank Orko and thank IIT Gandhinagar for making this possible. And I received a WhatsApp message and a phone call from Orko some time back, whose work I have followed closely, I think closely. Orko, I read his entire book from cover to cover to write a very short blurb, but I really wanted to read it. It was exceptionally good work. So thanks, Orko, for making this possible. I will try to address largely the students in your class. Okay, I am kind of ignoring the others who are here because it is this discussion is part of a course, and it should not go too far away from the course, and should address the concerns of those who are part of the course. So with this background and build up, let me come to the question and problem of corticocentrism. And we will see what is corticocentrism, but first, two cautionary notes over here. One, as we talk of corticocentrism, what is it, and its connection to anthropocentrism? And I have put up a book over there, the picture of a book Politics of Evolution by, on a book on Stephen Jay Gould, somebody who has influenced me hugely, actually, in my movement out of or a little away from medicine. Usually, when we think of evolutionary journeys of any kind, even when we think of history, we think of it usually in and through the image, the metaphor, the picture of the step ladder, as we can see over here in red below. And it's usually a triangle, and quote unquote lower animals are below, and as you go up and up and up and up, the pinnacle, the apex of the triangle is where the human is. So our usual tendency is to put the human at either the apex, the top of the triangle, or our tendency is to have a step ladder and put the human at the top. And somewhere there is a connection between putting the human at the pinnacle, at the peak, at the top, a kind of anthropocentrism, and putting the cortex at the top, putting the cortical at the top, at the pinnacle, at a point where it is in control, etc. And we will look at these as we go along. And Stephen Jay Gould, of the many important things he did in his life, a Marxist biologist, he redrew this picture of evolution, which is usually presented in terms of the Christmas tree. Again, it's that triangle that goes up the Christmas tree. And he redrew evolution in terms of, I have given you two Victorian models over here. Both are from him, actually. One, as you can see, where there are as if parallel tracks and they are evolving, and it is not that the human is at the top, but there are a number of tracks that are moving side by side. The other picture, as you can see, the right hand lower corner, again, it is a model which opens up, actually, and doesn't kind of converge to a peak, to an apex like this. It is a model that goes like this, that opens up in this way. So that happens when we look at evolution, redraw the story of evolution, and by default, redraw the story of life. This is the story of life, according to Stephen Jay Gould. Redraw the story of life as a kind of, kind of an originary multiplicity, if I may put it that way, a kind of opening up, efflorescence, a kind of parallel tracks moving side by side, and not all the diversity, all the differences coalescing into a final, ultimate, penultimate kind of a quasi-transcendental peak or apex, the human. So while in evolution we have had to deal with the question of anthropocentrism, or in history we have had to deal with the question of the anthropocentric, it's somewhere as if secretly lends itself to corticocentrism, to cortical, to higher, from lower animals to higher animals, and that remains the usual framework of looking at the cortical. We can go to the next slide, Camelia. It opens up a question for us. The question is somewhat like this, and here comes my second caution. Okay, first is not to take the evolutionary tale as given. Look for the politics in evolutionary theory, number one. Number two, and this is 2 minutes on philosophy of science. Number two is not to take what we are doing today, or what some others are doing in some other place at present, at around the same time perhaps, as final or given. There is a tendency in the sciences, to see science also in terms of the step ladder model, to see the sciences also in terms of this triangulated structure, to see sciences as a step ladder movement from lower to higher, from less sophisticated knowledge to more sophisticated knowledge, which Michel Foucault would call the increasing formalization of knowledge. I would put it this way: the myth of an increasing formalization of knowledge, the idea that the current knowledge is the best knowledge and the correct knowledge. Because we have seen corrections and corrections and corrections again and again, each time that current knowledge was seen to be not the best knowledge, it has required correction. Sometimes it has required also the rear view mirror image, the rear view mirror perspective. We have seen through the rear view mirror that older knowledges were also equally interesting, equally relevant. And the critique of the corticocentric view, as I scanned the material in the last about 6 months, the critique of the corticocentric view is not a contemporary critique. It was a critique that happened at the time of Sigmund Freud in the 1920s and 1930s, but that critique was not taken note of. Now, through the rear view mirror, we are managing to see the relevance of that critique, a critique that has been put aside when it was first generated. So please, what we are discussing today, we are discussing in light of our self-doubts, in light of our questions, in light of making connections, not in the spirit of a final certainty. Okay, this is not the final solution to the consciousness debate or to the question of the unconscious. No, this is a research program, a research paradigm, a research perspective that is emerging and that is putting kind of under erasure the corticocentric perspective. It is not completely doing away with the cortical, please. So I first would not want there to be any misunderstanding emanating from, again, a kind of certainty, a kind of finality to what we are discussing today. No, these are thoughts that have come now, and they are open to revision, correction, displacement, newer connections, all kinds of possibilities. So this is the caution too. Let us not take this as the final solution in an increasing formalization of knowledge in terms of a step ladder. So what this opens up, the work of Panksepp, the work of the Messier, the work of Solms, and many, many others actually, Friston of late actually, the work of Catherine Malabou, which Orko talked of, the work of Johnston, but what is important, Eric Kandel, not the names and the books necessarily, but the opening they are creating in our thinking, the importance of lower brain affective phenomenal experiences. And this is Mark Solms' book, Hidden Spring. Since the cerebral cortex is the seat of intelligence, almost everybody thinks that it is also the seat of consciousness. Is it so? Consciousness, is it far more primitive than that? Quote unquote primitive. It arises from a part of the brain that humans share with fishes, crocodiles, rats. This is the hidden spring of consciousness. And take the metaphor of spring, actually. Consciousness is not from above. Consciousness is as if from below, a kind of efflorescence from below, actually, a kind of spring, a kind of hidden spring from below. And consciousness may be dependent on the original evolution of affective phenomenal experiences that coded survival values. We will open this up as we go along, but the first movement away from cognition to affect, cortical to subcortical, higher brain to lower brain, perceptual experiences to phenomenal inner body experiences, outer world experiences to inner world experiences. Question of affect, not merely language. Question of the animal within us, the mammalian brain, which is nearly 200 million years old within us, and the movement thereafter. We'll come to the next slide. Camelia, next slide. And this opens up the question, are primal sub-neocortical networks of emotions and other primal affects the scaffold for the sentient being? Are we what we are because of emotions, because of affects? The fundamental contribution of the cortex to consciousness in this respect is stabilization and refinement of the objects of perception and generating thinking and ideas. This contribution derives from the unrivaled capacity of the cortex for representational forms of memory. To put it metaphorically, the cortex transforms the fleeting wave-like states of consciousness into mental solids. It generates objects. Freud called them object presentations or word ideas. We don't have the time to go into psychoanalysis, but even this quotation, which is from a 2012 paper by Solms and Panksepp, even this paper is still not very sure, very confident, very clear about the role of the subcortical. It is still trying to think what is the connection. How does one integrate affective and cognitive aspects of conscious and unconscious brain processes? Okay, so it is still trying to make a connection between these two, and it's still feeling that there is something below which is not yet absolutely clear, but it is contributing, it looks like, to consciousness. Next slide. This opens up our discussion around three kinds of consciousness. Now, this is important actually, that when we are talking of consciousness and the hard problem of consciousness, not where is consciousness coming from, which is largely about brain areas, which is important, but how and why do we become conscious? The question is not just where, the question is how and why do we have an experience of consciousness? How and where and why do we have something called intentionality? What is the experience of seeing, hearing? And this opens up the layers of consciousness over here in terms of anoetic consciousness, as if unthinking forms of experience which may be affectively intense without being known, and could be the space and birthright of all mammals. And looks like it is in the upper brain stem. It is a kind of a first person consciousness. Noetic thinking forms of consciousness linked to exteroceptive perception and cognition, subcortical ganglia and upper limbic, autonoetic abstracted forms of perceptions and cognitions, which allow conscious awareness and reflection upon experience in the mind's eye through episodic memories and fantasies, kind of in the neocortex. But even if this slide is a little difficult, let us see the opening that this slide creates, building on the work of earlier thinkers. It is that it looks like while we earlier thought consciousness was exclusively cortical, higher, above, or we thought it was largely in the neocortical, the question that has opened up over here is that, is there brainstem consciousness? is there something in the subcortical ganglia and the upper limbic system? So are there layers and layers? Now let us take this as the learning from this slide. This much is enough actually, that consciousness is not merely cortical. It's not from above merely. Okay, there looks to be consciousness from below. And that is the opening, and it is at the lower brainstem, it is at the mid level, and it is also at the neocortical level. So are there layers and layers of consciousness actually? And that opens up the question: is the lower brainstem contributing to consciousness? A more conservative, careful question actually, that still assumes that consciousness is cortical, but there is some contribution from below. That is a careful, conservative question actually. Question 2: is it the lower brain? Is it the brainstem that is generating consciousness? That's a more courageous question actually, that it is not cortical, it is coming entirely from below. There is a third question, which is a more dangerous question. Even if there are layers and layers of consciousness generating processes, is there a qualitative difference? And this is most important, in the kind of consciousness the lower brain, the brainstem generates. And I hate to call it lower now, actually, because we may have got the brain upside down. We may have got the neuronal self hitherto upside down. And it reminds me of that misreading of Marx's purported reading of Hegel, turning Hegel around. That's a misreading, of course, but the way it was done in those days, early days. Is there something similar that one needs to do with the brain or the neuronal self? Have we got it the other way around? And in that sense, the higher, lower, top, down, above, below, inner, outer relationship requires rethinking. That's the larger philosophical question, actually. Hence, we have to think psychoanalysis, philosophy, neuroscience together, not in isolation. But this opens up that important question: is there qualitative difference in the kind of consciousness the brainstem, the lower brain generates? Is there something qualitatively different? Can we call it affective consciousness rather than cognitive consciousness? We'll come to that. We'll look at it. Next slide, Demelia. This opens up a question for us. I'll have to go a little faster now, I think. A rethinking, and I take it from Panksepp's book, Affective Neuroscience, this picture. It's not by me, where they are trying to think of that kind of brainstem consciousness. And then I'll open this up as we go along. The 7 pathways of emotions: seeking, rage, fear, lust, care, pain, grief, and play. We will come to this as we go along. But what is important in this slide is the two-way movement, two-way or circular causation in the brain, or in psychoanalytic and Marxian language, it would be overdetermination. Okay. But the movement is from primary process emotions, affects deeply subcortical, bottom up, it's going up to secondary process learning, largely upper limbic, tertiary process cognitions, largely neocortical, but then it is again operating like a loop back. So we are not getting in the brain a one-way movement. But what we are seeing is a two-way movement. Next slide. This then shows to us an illustration from Damasio, redone by Solms, actually. It shows to us, if you can look at the brain stem parts, what you see are those areas marked in red, violet. Those are the areas in the brain stem. I'm not naming them actually today, where brainstem consciousness is generated. And these areas we share with mammals, with animals, even prior to the mammals in the evolutionary chain. Cross mammalian foundations of the brain. So anthropocentrism doesn't work. The cross mammalian foundations of the brain, the mammalian roots of the brain, and the mammalian parts of the brain, including parts from organisms prior to mammals. This opens up for us a place over here in the brainstem, which in Freudian language is the pleasure-unpleasure series, the connection between pleasure and unpleasure. I'll read out that first part. Affects, rather than representing discrete external events, are experienced as positively and negatively valent states. Their valence is determined by how changing internal conditions relate to the probability of survival and reproductive success. At this level of the brain, homeostasis is inseparable for consciousness. I don't have the time to go into homeostasis, but in one quick line, homeostasis is how the body internally maintains balance. Say, for example, maintains temperature. Our body does not lapse into environmental temperature. It maintains a kind of thermoregulation and keeps the temperature at a level actually within the body. So as if the human body works against the law of entropy, and that is the process, or one could call it the law of homeostasis, homeostatic mechanisms in the body, how it maintains, say, just take this as an example, temperature within the body, thermoregulation in the body. Would it open up like Newton's laws of motion, laws of effect? Okay, this affective state. Oh, I'm feeling warm, I'm feeling cold. Feeling warm, feeling cold. The moment of feeling something, and feelings are conscious. One feels. So the feeling of feelings at work over here, and homeostasis, affect, consciousness are connected over here. Next slide. But what we saw over here was the role of the brainstem. Camilla, just one second. The upper part of the brain that we are getting to see in green, in yellow, which is now, see, that is the surface of the brain. That is the outer part of the brain. It's as if the outer part of a, say, for example, a coconut. The inside of the brain, which is that part marked in those colors, that part of the brain is that lower brainstem, affective consciousness tied to homeostasis and internal bodily mechanisms. We'll look at the internal bodily mechanisms in the next slide. Go to the next one, Camelia. This is the basic 7. It could be 8 as well. There is debate on whether it is 7 or 8 up to now, but these are the 7 or 8 we know now. Actually, that is the circuits for basic emotion, the seven pathways: appetitive foraging, consummatory reward, freezing and flight, aggressive attack, nurture and care, separation, distress, and hence panic, anxiety, rough and tumble play. So what we are seeing is that just above the brainstem, at the mid-level of the brain, I'm not naming it, there are these 7/8 pathways. Play, as Winnicott suggested, separation distress in the infant, care, which is one of the pathways, rage, fear, consummatory reward, appetitive foraging. Expectant interest, orgasmic delight, fear, destructive rage, loving affection, sorrowful grief, and exuberant joy. But play has two sides to it. We don't have the time to get into it. Play on the one hand has joy, on the other hand has kind of violence. But let's not go there. But these are the pathways that are coming up from below. Go to the next slide, Camille. So what happens over here then? And this slide is the most important slide over here in our discussion today. Let's read the lower part and then read the one in red above, which is as if an attempt to rewrite neuroscience in Freudian terms and psychoanalysis in neuroscientific terms. The homeostatic internal body drives, such as hunger and thermoregulation. Okay, I discussed thermoregulation. Okay, homeostatic internal bodily drives. The sensory effects which help regulate those drives, such as affective aspects of taste and feelings of coldness and warmth. The instinctual emotional networks of the brain, which embody the action tools that ambulate organisms need to satisfy their affective drives in the outside world, such as searching for food and warmth. This whole space, A, B, C, would be called affective consciousness, tied to internal homeostasis. These instinctual survival tools include seeking, lust, fear, rage, panic, grief, care, play. They're put in capital because we also want to distinguish it from the usual English language understanding of these words. So what has happened over here is that the extant model of the brain or the neuronal self or the psyche has turned. The external body corresponds to the ego, and the internal body is the id. But the id is the fountainhead of consciousness. But which kind of consciousness? Affective consciousness. And much of cortical activity is non-conscious. Now that produces a significant turntable. Actually, I'm reminded of Marx's phrase in Capital Volume 1, turning the table. The turntable, turning the table, actually, that is what is happening now in affective neuroscience, that we are contending with then not just lower brain or brainstem consciousness, but we are also contending with inner body consciousness, affective consciousness tied to homeostatic processes. Camelia, go to the next one. It will become clearer in the next one, actually. This is from Damasio, which opens up the pathways of, let me call it the pathways of affect, grief, joy, sad, happy, rage, fear, anger. But what I just want to highlight over here in the time I have is that mark the areas over here. Most of the areas are lower brain areas or midbrain areas, thalamic, hypothalamic, limbic, or lower. Okay, around the periaqueductal gray. Okay, they are lower areas, as you can see, marked by the arrows over there. The fear areas you can see with the two arrows, anger, rage. So they are lower areas actually where we have the core of affective consciousness, the core of feeling and feelings. And Freud himself had suggested this: feelings cannot be non-conscious. Feelings are conscious. Okay, we feel the feeling. Feelings are conscious, and hence what is happening at a lower brainstem, midbrain level are processes of consciousness. So consciousness is not coming from above; it is coming from below as a kind of efflorescence. Next slide, Camille. what is happening over here, and this is from Mark Solms, The Hidden Spring, though he had actually suggested it earlier. This is a baby girl who doesn't have the cortex, and in spite of the absence of the cortex, there is consciousness. And this study opened up the space for this fundamental doubt. Is consciousness cortical, or is consciousness subcortical? Is the nature of consciousness affective? Is cortical processes non-conscious? I'm not saying unconscious, non-conscious. And this opens up a fierce debate in the neurosciences. Absence of the cortex, but there is consciousness. Next slide, Camille. Cortical removal did not interrupt the presence of the conscious self, of conscious being. It merely deprived the patient of certain forms of information. The brainstem structures that generate conscious states are not only responsible for the degree, so it's not volume that the brainstem gives, but also for the core quality of subjective being. And this affective consciousness is now being considered as one of the ways to understand the hard problem of consciousness. Consciousness is generated in the id. The classical conception is turned on its head. The cortex was not the initial generator of consciousness, but this is not widely recognized in consciousness studies or in cognitive science. Neocortex without a brainstem can never be conscious, but subcortical beings without the cortex are conscious in an affective sense. And this opens up a serious question for us. Just reread that last part. The classical conception is turned on its head. The cortex was not the initial generator of consciousness, but this is not widely recognized in consciousness studies or in cognitive science. And that is where Orko and I connected to do this, kind of discussion for his course. Neocortex without a brainstem can never be conscious. But without the cortex, there is affective consciousness in the subject. Next slide, Camelia. Orko, I'm nearly done. This opens up what I would put as a line I take from Panksepp and Solms. I feel like this about that. I feel like this about that. Mark the this and the that, and I feel. I feel. It's not I think, therefore I am. It's I feel, therefore I am. And there is a third, more dangerous suggestion over here. I feel, therefore I think. Our thoughts are signifiers, the product of affect. I feel like this about that, where this, the this in this sentence is consciousness, and that is perception. And here, actually, 2 minutes for all of us on this over here. And we were all taught like this when we studied medicine, actually, or even psychology. I call it waking state psychology, actually, because we do not do sleeping state psychology, which is dream, which is the unconscious in psychoanalysis in Freud. Okay, and the suggestion I have made is that while in waking state, the brain, quickly put, kind of metaphorically moves from the occipital lobe, the visual perception, to the frontal. In sleeping state psychology, dreams, the unconscious, as the Royal Road, The brain is as if moving in reverse gear from the frontal lobe to the occipital lobe. Thoughts generative of images. Similarly, we tend to see, Camelia, please be in the earlier slide. Yeah, we tend to see ourselves in terms of our relationship with the outside world. That is our usual tendency. So we tend to see ourselves through perception or apperception. There's a world out there and we are receiving that world. But there is a world inside. So perception is not the only world we inhabit. There is an internal state. And there is, in that sense, two bodies in us, an objective outer world body and an inner internal body. So there are as if two moments. I feel like this about that. That is in the world outside. That is perception. That is the body I see in the mirror. But the body I experience when I shut my eyes. Close your eyes and your blind spots dance. Derrida's lines. We see that blind spot, affective consciousness, affective bodily consciousness tied to homeostasis. That consciousness, so the line is important over here. I feel like this is consciousness, my feeling of my feelings about that is perception, the world outside. This opens up consciousness as not only from the outside world, but consciousness from below, from inside, from internal perception. Since cortical consciousness is contingent upon brainstem consciousness, this is the turntable. Cortical consciousness is contingent upon brainstem consciousness. Affect is revealed to be the foundational form of consciousness. The sentient subject is literally constituted by affect. Next slide, Camelia. Traditionally, the cerebral cortex is seen to have the most important role in higher functions of the brain, such as cognition and behavioral regulation, whereas subcortical structures are considered to have subservient or no roles in these functions. This article highlights the conceptual bias at the root of this corticocentric view of the human brain and emphasizes its negative implications in current practices in the cognitive neurosciences. The aim of this article is to suggest that the corticocentric view of the human brain is a myopic view because it does not let us see that the higher functions of the brain might in fact depend upon the integrity of its lower structures. And we are now learning that a small cut in a 2 cubic millimeter area in the brainstem leads to complete cessation of consciousness. This is a paper in Trends in Cognitive Sciences. I have given you the reference. Next slide, Camelia. Two notes of caution again. This is not to say that, well, there is another self within the self. The story contained in the images of core consciousness, core affective consciousness, is not told by some clever homunculus. It's not an Anup within an Anup within that Anup, and an Anup within that Anup. Nor is the story really told by you as a self, because the core you is only born as the story is told, within the story itself. You exist as a mental being when primordial stories are being told, and only then, as long as primordial stories are being told, and only then. The last line is a beautiful line, deeply philosophical, spiritual. You are the music while the music lasts. So when we discuss consciousness, we don't discuss it in terms of the philosophy that had driven much of medicine and neurobiology nowadays, localization. That, well, there is one area over there in which it can be located. No, it is dynamic, it is an originary multiplicity, it is neuroplastic, and it is a process, it is overdetermined. Next slide, Amelia. This is one caution, the last caution. The cognitive unconscious is not the same as the Freudian or dynamic unconscious. The term cognitive unconscious merely implies that a lot of what the mind does goes on outside of consciousness, whereas the dynamic unconscious is a darker, more malevolent place where emotionally charged memories are shipped, garnered to do mental work, hard mental work. I would actually, and this literature is still not distinguishing or clarifying this point as well, I feel. That we perhaps need to distinguish between unconscious and unconscious. In terms of the cognitive unconscious, redesignated as non-conscious. It is merely that which has not become conscious yet. And the Freudian unconscious designated as affective unconscious, unconscious that has been either repressed. Okay, for today's discussion, let it be repressed. Let me not bring in the other parameters. The non-repressed unconscious, let me not bring that. But the distinction between non-conscious and unconscious, I think, needs to be worked out over here. Perception itself is a non-conscious process and begs the question, what does consciousness, brainstem, mammalian, lower animal, midbrain, hypothalamic, periaqueductal gray, what does lower brain consciousness add to perception? The answer is consciousness adds feeling. And this actually opens up the question of consciousness in a very different way for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anup Dhar. So we have some time for questions, comments. I mean, this very rich talk kind of again goes back to one of the central threads in this course that we have been talking about, the relations, if at all, there could be relations between the non-conscious and the unconscious, and whether, I mean, the way Catherine Hales would put it, the psychoanalytic unconscious is like a subset of the more default cognitive unconscious, which is kind of automatically unconscious. And that's why, again, someone like Malibu would not use the word unconscious there, would use the word non-conscious. That
that is my difficulty also, actually.
Yeah.
The conflation of terms. Yeah.
Right.
Please go ahead.
Right. No, that's just to start off a conversation, Camelia. Maybe we could not share the screen anymore so that we can have a more Republican view of the audience, possibly. Yeah. Okay, great. So questions. I don't want to take up a lot of time. Questions, especially I would like to see if there are questions from the students in this course, some of whom I guess are not here or have left. I can see, but some of them are there. So if there's a question, if there's a doubt, if anything that you would like Dr. Dhar to clarify once more, because there was a lot of new material there, right? I mean, we haven't really discussed Panksepp or I've just mentioned the affective brain hypothesis, but we haven't gone into it at all. So if there is anything that you would like him to perhaps go over or go through once more, please unmute yourself and speak. Let me just check one thing, whether that setting is enabled. Sometimes it's a bit weird on Zoom. I think you can unmute yourself.
They can unmute themselves.
Right.
Okay. It's fine.
Yeah. So any question from anyone?
Anything that was difficult, actually, because I don't know what has been done in the course. I may have done something that is.
No, I think it really opens up because we were, of course, talking less about some of these notions, even when we were talking about the same thinkers. Like we did talk about Damasio, and especially that idea of primordial feelings in the primordial self before the core self and the autobiographical self kind of step in. But the way you went over the neuroscientific dimensions of, or the neurobiological, let's say, dimensions of that theorization is something that I'm sure would add a newer, nuances to what we have been discussing anyway. And this entire discussion of corticocentrism, a critique of corticocentrism, and especially this very interesting suggestion that maybe most of the cortical work is non-conscious, whereas the subcortical work is the core of consciousness, which is essentially affective. And thereby to sort of, as you ended there, to think of the unconscious as affective unconscious, possibly at some level, the subcortical affective processes, contributing to the Freudian unconscious or the psychoanalytic unconscious. That I thought was a very, very interesting kind of a direction that this talk opened up. Thank you very much for that.
It's a suggestion only, Orko. I'm also thinking about it. It's not that I'm confident about it, but there is something that is troubling over there now, given what we are seeing in the news.
Right. And another thing that I have always been a little bit divided upon, I suppose, is this notion of the unconscious affect or conscious affect, because of course it is true that Freud says that feelings are displaced and not repressed. But as you pointed out towards the end, and we have that sentence, I think at the end of the first paragraph of the 1915 text, that clearly uncouples repression and unconscious.
Yes.
And we have, someone like Ignacio Mate Blanco talking about the unrepressed unconscious, right? So I was just generally thinking, because displacement is one of the two fundamental tools of dream work. So the fact that feelings are displaced does not necessarily mean that feelings are not unconscious, because displacement is part of the unconscious mechanism, right? So, what kind of Johnston and Malibu do, especially Johnston in that book, is to sort of finally argue that affects are signifiers. I'm not necessarily making that kind of a radicalization, but but it was very interesting because I thought in certain ways you were arguing from the other way around. Not the affect as signifiers, but possibly, the very core of the unconscious as something affective, which makes a departure from at least the earlier Lacanian unconscious, which is, primarily driven by the signifier.
Yes. In fact, Orko, it helps me a little bit to share my current self-doubt, is that one is to say affects are signifiers. One. The second is to say there are misfelt or unfelt feelings, which is interesting. See, in that same unconscious piece, the last section is on displacement condensation. Just after that unconscious emotions section. So their displacement condensation is opened up for discussion. So now, are there then misfelt, unfelt efforts? But where I'm trying to get at, Orko, and see again, these are things we will have to look at and work on, actually. Sure. Are signifiers affective? Which signifier will move from the realm of the non-conscious to the realm of the unconscious? What is the libidinal charge? Is there an affective apposition momentarily over there? Which signifiers become nodal points?
Right.
Do they become because there is an affective apposition? So one is to say affects, affective signifiers. The other is to say signifiers are affective. So I was thinking of connecting, Lacan's.
No, this is a fascinating suggestion, right? For example, if we go by a very fundamental phenomenon that we see in practice, certain signifiers remain with us more than others because there's a strong affective charge in those signifiers, right? And a classic situation is if I've been insulted by a word, and if someone else uses that word in a perfectly innocuous way without any intention to insult me, I might still take it as an insult, right?
Because there is a short circuit.
Charge. Yes, there's a short circuit.
This X phrase. Short circuit. Because there is a short circuit. Okay. That it has retained its affective charge.
Right.
As if clinging tenaciously to the material body of the signifier.
Right.
Do we see the signifier then a little differently?
Hmm.
That is the route I'm trying to take over here, actually.
Right.
That
Right.
signifiers are affective. In a way.
No, this is fascinating. I don't know whether there are questions. I don't see any in the chat box. Or is there a question from the floor? I'm not sure how many students are here anymore. But anyway, I mean, anyone who's attending, please feel free to ask questions if you have any. I think our students were a bit too shy to ask questions. I mean, this is a pattern we have noticed with guest speakers. I wouldn't blame anyone for that. So yeah, please, if any questions from others, please unmute yourself and speak. Thank you.
We have silenced everybody.
Maybe speculation leads to silence. I mean, there's a lot of speculation in what I'm saying. And as you were saying too, there are speculative movements of thought here without finality. And I suppose that's the philosophy of thinking we are coming from as well. Rather than thought as silencing, we are talking about thought as opening. So if there are openings in the minds of the audience, please ask your questions. You can also put it in the chat box. I'm just checking if that option, sorry, I would have been more efficient with the laptop or the desktop. I'm still a little bit novice when it comes to Zoom on iPad, but I think that option is there. Yes. The recording, Nainye, would be available from the YouTube channel of IIT Gandhinagar, but it will take some time, possibly a month. Yeah. Thank you. If we don't have any question whatsoever, it means, you know, we could perhaps close this session. But thank you so much, Anup Dhar. It was wonderful, and also to think. Again, in relation to what you were saying there, because we've had, I mean, we are clearly working around the same precipice, let us say, but maybe moving in different directions. But especially this idea of affective signifier does speak to me also in terms of practice, psychoanalytic practice, because it's something that we see, right? I mean, it's something that we notice almost on a regular basis in practice, that there are affective signifiers. And whether it's through the relation between affect and signifier that we can rethink what Lacan would call the signifier one, the master signifier, and the master signifiers that get produced in analysis, right? I mean, because it's not one, it could be any number of ones. I mean, it's you know, there's one all alone. So it's a serialization of ones that are produced by analysis. But the role of affect, of course, even within Lacanian psychoanalysis, as we know, has been reimagined and rethought to a large extent. Also, perhaps doing a sort of against the grain reading of Lacan, because Lacan was a little bit ambivalent on this. I mean, he would always think of the affect as a background to the signifier rather than a foreground. But perhaps we need to rethink that relation.
That is what I'm trying to do, actually. Yeah. Read seminar 10, seminar 8.
Right.
17, that half chicken idea in seminar 17, seminar 20, Josef. So how, where symptom? Right. Where is this?
And jouissance is definitely a step towards affect, right? In Lacan's teaching, it is definitely you know, foregrounding affect without perhaps using the term that way. But jouissance, I mean, that's where ultimately we go in seminar 20, as you said. I mean, and what is the subject of jouissance? How is the subject of jouissance different from the subject of the signifier? You know, primarily theorized in the earlier teaching. Yeah.
And where is the connection between these?
Where is the connection? Right.
And is there a movement from Rome discourse to seminar 17 with 10 anxiety? The anxiety seminars, and Freud says it, or sorry, it's becoming a conversation between the two of us, but just one line. Freud says it in the unconscious piece only, that the anxiety is my primary affect.
Yes.
Anxiety is as if that which gives the entry for us into this world. And maybe Lacan saw it actually. and hence the elaboration around anxiety. So there must be something there actually, but it's a little bit of, reading, a kind of reading actually. It's not evident, it's not the dominant. There is a little bit of reading involved over here.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the way Althusser would read Marx, possibly, yes, and Lacan himself will read
Freud. Yes.
Perhaps there's a need to read Lacan in that way as well.
I was trying to do that also, actually. Yeah. Can I read him, as if read him for his symptoms?
Sure.
Kind of. Was the, madness over here, actually. I didn't go so much that way today.
Because, right. No, I mean, this is, of course, what Blanchot would call an infinite conversation, but maybe we'll have to cut it at some point. And if there are no more questions, we would perhaps close this session. But thank you everyone who joined in, and thank you so much to Anup Dhar.
Thank you
for this wonderful talk. It really made all of us think, I'm sure, in very different, unique, subjective directions. Thank you so much. And thank you, Anup Dhar. Bye-bye. Hope to see you soon sometime in person. Bye.